Welcome to my introduction to Flutter for beginners. In this tutorial, you'll learn everything you need to know about creating basic layouts in Flutter. The material that you'll see here is part of my Flutter and Firebase course on Udemy, and this includes 2 full hours of content on building layouts, and it shows you how to build this SignInPage from scratch. So this is what you will learn in this video. We will start from the basics and learn about MaterialApp and ThemeData and how to create scaffolds with an AppBar. And then we will cover the column and row widgets and see how to use the CrossAxisAlignment and MainAxisAlignment properties. We will learn about how to add padding and how to create and customize text widgets, as well as how to create custom buttons and customize their color, shape, and how to add images with logos inside them. While doing this, we will create our own custom button widget and learn how to design a good and ergonomic widget API. And because this tutorial is for beginners, we will take it nice and slow. And just to be clear, this tutorial dives straight into Flutter and doesn't cover the Dart language in detail. So if you are new to Dart, I recommend that you follow my introduction to Dart, which is freely available as a playlist on my YouTube channel. So I hope you enjoy the rest of this tutorial and make sure to like and subscribe for more Flutter videos. And if you're serious about learning Flutter and Firebase, you should consider enrolling in my full course, which contains 22 hours of content and goes well beyond the basics. And you can buy the course for a discounted price on my website at codewithandrea.com. or using the link in the description below. Okay, so let's get started and learn about layout basics in Flutter. By the way, this tutorial starts with the default counter application that you get when you create a new Flutter project. So make sure that you have Flutter already configured and installed on your system and that you have already created a new Flutter project that you'll use to follow along. Okay, so we're now ready to start, and the first thing that we're going to do is to delete all the code. Next, we need to import a specific file so that we have what we need in order to build our Flutter app. So the first thing we do is to type in import, and then in single quotes we start typing material, and Android Studio is suggesting a package that we can import in here. This is the correct one, so we type enter, and then next thing we want to do is to define the entry point of our application. So in here we can type void main, and this is the main method of our app. Now in here we need to tell Flutter to run our app. So we're going to invoke a method which is called run app, and we can see that it takes one parameter, which is the root widget of our entire app. So in a second we'll create a class for our root widget, and we can really give it any name we want. So in here I'm just going to choose to call it my app, just like that. And when I do this, Android Studio points out that this name is not yet defined, and that's because we haven't declared it to be a class just yet. Alright, so next I'm just going to go down here, and what I want to do is to create a class which will extend stateless widget, and that name of that class will be my app. Now I could just type in all of this manually, but instead I'm going to use a really cool feature of Android Studio, which is called templates. So what I can do is start typing in stateless, and I can see that Android Studio is proposing me a few different options. So I'm gonna choose the first one, and I can see that it's now filled in all the template that is needed to create a stateless widget class. So all I have left to do is just to type in the name of my class, which is my app. And I'm done. Okay, so what I have here is a minimal Flutter app, and this is code that will already compile. In fact, I can just try to hot reload the app, and what I'm going to get is a black screen. Now, just so you know, this is completely expected, and that's because even though we have created our widget, we are not really showing anything interesting yet. Before we write any more code, I want to explain a little bit more in detail what we have done. So on the first line of this file, we have imported the material file from the Flutter package. As we continue on this course, we will often have to import things that are defined in other files. So the place to put these imports is always at the top of the Dart file. The syntax of the Dart import statement is always like this. So you have an import keyword at the beginning, and then within quotes you type in package colon and then the path to the file that you're after. Alright, then we have defined the main method, and every Flutter app always requires a main method, and inside it you always want to call run app with the root widget of your app. Then we have created our first widget, which is called my app and is a stateless widget, and because of this it needs to implement a build method. Now here Android Studio has inserted an override annotation for us. What this does is tell the compiler that we're actually overriding a method on the superclass, and in this case this is stateless widget. The build method returns a widget and takes a build context as a parameter, and we will see a bit later what the build context is for. Finally, we return a container object here, which is a very common Flutter widget. We will also explore this a little later. Okay, so we're now ready to replace this black screen with something more interesting, and we'll do that in the next video. In the previous video, we started building our app and we have created our first widget. However, the screen appears completely black in our simulator. Now we're going to build an app that uses material design for our UI. So what we want to do here is to use MaterialApp widget that we have seen before. So rather than returning a container, here we are going to say MaterialApp instead. Now, if you remember, this is a widget that takes a few properties, and so we are going to add them now. The first one is a title, so here we could just say something like time tracker. Then the second property that we want is a theme that will be used throughout the app, and we define this by adding a ThemeData object. And this is something that has a number of different properties, but the one that we're really interested in is called primary swatch. And in here we want to define the primary color of our entire app. So for now I'm just going to choose this to be colors.indigo. You can see here that the Android Studio proposes a lot of different options, so this is the one that I want to use for now. Okay, next I need to define a home for my Material app, and this is going to be a widget. Because I haven't created the sign-in page yet for my app, here I just want to have some kind of placeholder for the time being. And so what I'm going to use right now, again, is going to be a container, which will be just empty. Now, if I save and hot reload now, I can see that nothing much has really changed. And actually, there is a little banner that has appeared over here to the top right, and it says debug. And this is just a useful visual hint to tell us that the app is being compiled in debug mode. And debug mode is what allows us to use features such as hot reload. In any case, the app still doesn't look very interesting, so one thing that we could try to do now would be to change the background color of the app. So the way we can do that would be to add a color property to our container, and we can choose that by typing in colors dot, for example, white. Now I can save again, and I can see that the app completely changes and it turns white. Now I still haven't explained what this container widget is, but don't worry, I won't keep it a secret for much longer. For now, just bear with me as we are going to start building the sign-in page in the next video. In the previous videos, we have created a very simple Material app which shows a white background. What we are going to do next is to lay the foundations for the first page of our time tracker app. And this is going to be the sign-in page that we can see if I open the final app over here. And the first thing that we need to decide is where we are going to store the code for that sign-in page. In other words, we can start thinking about a project structure that will allow our app to grow as we add more and more pages and features. At this stage, we could choose to keep writing code on this main.dart file. But this is not something that we want to do, because we want to define a new class for our sign-in page, and I think this deserves to be in its own file. So the question is, where do we put that file? Now, I could just choose the lib folder over here and create a new file, just like this. But I'm going to suggest that this is not a good idea. Instead, I'd like to keep all widgets that are specific to certain pages or features in their own folder. So what I'm going to do is to create a new folder, and I can do that by selecting new package in Android Studio, and I'm going to call this app, like this. Now, in addition to that, I'm also going to create a subfolder called SignIn. So I'm going to type that in. And now I can see here, like, it seems that Android Studio has decided to collapse together the app and sign-in folders into one item. But if we look at the top over here, we can see that we definitely have a folder called app, and inside that we have another one called SignIn. Okay, so we will see that adding functionality for signing in into the app will keep us busy for quite a while in this course, and I expect that we'll end up with a few different files in here. So now that we have this folder, I'm going to create a new file, Dart file in fact, and I'll call this SignInPage, and I can continue on the next video. We are now ready to start writing the code for our sign-in page. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a sign-in page class as a stateless widget in the same way that we've done before. So here we're just going to use the Android Studio template for stateless widget, and we're going to name this SignInPage. Now we can see that there's quite a lot of things that the compiler is not happy with. And the reason for that is that we forgot to import the Flutter package that defines all these different symbols. So we can fix this very quickly by placing our cursor, for example, on status widget, and then pressing Alt-Enter. And here we are given a choice of imports that we can choose. So we're going to select the material package, and we can see that all the warnings go away. Okay, we have now defined our sign-in page, and before we add any more coding here, we must remember to actually add it to our root widget. So what we are going to do is to head back to our main.dart file, and what we are going to do is replace this container with an instance of the sign-in page that we have just created. So I'm going to type that in and put it like this. And the compiler is not happy because although we have added it here, we have forgot to import the correct file. So like we have done before, we can select this symbol and import the missing file by pressing Alt-Enter, and the editor just suggests the right thing to do. So we are going to confirm that, and then we have imported the sign-in page. We are all clear now, so just to check that everything still works, we are going to run the app. And while we wait for the app to start, actually that was quite quick, we can just quickly inspect the import line that has been added by Android Studio. So what is done is add a package with name time tracker flutter course. So this is the name of our package. And then it includes the app/signin/signinpage.dart file. So this is the full path to our file that we have created within the time tracker flutter course package. Okay, so we can head back to our sign-in page, and we can see also that the app still looks white, so nothing in there to see at the moment. Now, since we are going to present an actual page here, we can make use of some of the useful UI elements that come out of the box with a scaffold widget. So what we are going to do in here is to replace this container with a scaffold. And the first thing that we want to add to our scaffold is an AppBar. So AppBar, defined like this, takes a number of interesting properties, and one of them is called title, which is a widget. Here we can define the title as a text, and in here we can type in time tracker. So if we save this and reload, we can see that at the top of our simulator, indigo color bar is appearing, and we now have this time tracker title in here. Now, before we make any more progress, I'd like to talk a little bit more about AppBar, and I'll do that in the next video. In the last video, we have added an AppBar to our scaffold, and as we can see, its background color is set to indigo, which is the main color of our app. However, we have not actually specified the color in the AppBar itself. So where does this come from? So AppBar is one of many widgets in Flutter which inherit some of their configuration from somewhere else. So if we go back to our main file, we can examine the primary swatch of our app, and we can see that it uses the indigo color. So at this stage, you might guess that if we change this, for example, to brown and reload the app, then the AppBar changes. And so this is exactly what happens. So for now, we're not going to investigate much in detail about how this works exactly, but just so you know, some widgets have the ability to load some of their properties directly from their ancestors. And in particular, this ThemeData object that we have created defines a lot of visual properties. We can find this out if we tap through to reveal the documentation, and here we find a long list of properties that are available for us to set up. In addition, all these properties are defined with some specific default values, and we can see them all over here. So for now, the most important thing to know is that some widgets will inherit some of their visual properties from ThemeData. Whenever you ask yourself, where does a certain color or text style come from, it is likely that it is defined inside the ThemeData object that you pass to the MaterialApp over here. And this has a lot of properties that are set by default. Okay, so we can restore the primary swatch back to indigo, save, and also get back to the SignInPage. And before we move on, I want to talk a little bit more about AppBar, and I'll do that in the next video. In the last video, we have introduced an AppBar widget to our SignInPage. Now, AppBar is a very useful and customizable widget that we can place at the top of the screen. In some of the previous videos, I have told you that a good way to inspect the documentation for Flutter widgets is to click through right from the editor. However, it is also good to know that the Flutter documentation can be inspected online. So if we open up a browser and head to this address at docs.flutter.io, we find the official Flutter documentation. This covers all the classes that are part of the Flutter SDK, as well as a lot of other packages that are often used when building Flutter apps. So at any time, you can come back to this page and learn more about Flutter and relevant packages. For now, I want to show you the documentation for the AppBar class. So I can do that by typing AppBar on the search box over here. And I am taken to this page, which has a nice illustration about how AppBar works. So in here, we can see that AppBar can show a number of different widgets in different positions. And you can really use this in a number of different ways. So for now, we are only using the title property of the AppBar, but there is much more to that, and we'll be using some other properties of AppBar later in this course. Okay, so that is what I wanted to say about AppBar for now, and we can head back to our editor and continue building our SignInPage. Okay, so before we move on and start adding content to this page, there is a little thing that I'd like to change about this AppBar, and that is a property which is called elevation. Now this is a double number, and elevation refers to the shadow that you can see under the AppBar. So we can try to edit this and see how the app changes. So we can set, for example, an elevation of 10. And if I save and hot reload, I can see that the shadow is much more prominent. Or if I set this to 0, then the shadow completely disappears. I believe there is a default value, which is 4. But I think in this example, I want to make it a little bit more subtle. And so I'm going to try a value of 2. So just a very subtle shadow down there. Okay, so I'm happy with this change and we're going to continue on the next video. In the last video, we have customized our AppBar. Next, we are going to figure out how to put some content on this page. Now, just as a reminder, our goal is to show a title and 4 different buttons, which look like this. So step 1 will be to try to get this look and feel for the buttons. And step 2 will be to add functionality so that we can use these buttons to sign in the user. But before we talk about buttons and how they work, we need to talk a little bit about layout. So what you see over here is a number of different widgets and they are all arranged vertically in our page. So if we want our page to look like this, we need to work out how we can place widgets vertically. And in order to do this, we need to use a widget which is called a column. Now, here is what we're going to do next. We are going to add a few widgets to our scaffold, and our initial goal is to position these widgets so that they are arranged vertically. So for now, we are not going to use buttons just yet, and instead, we are going to use some boxes of different colors. In the process of doing that, we are also going to learn how to add paddings and spacing between widgets. Okay, so we can get started in the next video. Okay, so this white area over here on the screen is the content area of our scaffold, and that is defined by a property which is called the body of the scaffold. So if we define that, we can add a widget to it, and let's get started for now with just a container. So we're going to type container, and this is it. Just to show you that this container actually fills the whole content of the scaffold, I can set a color for it. And for example, I could type colors.yellow. And now that I've just restarted the app, you can see that the whole content area is now yellow. Now, remember that our immediate goal is to draw some boxes on the screen with different colors, and we want to arrange them vertically. So we have just learned that this can be done with a column widget. But where can we put a column? So it is time to talk about the most important property of container, which is called child. So a container can specify a widget child, which could be any widget in Flutter. So what we are going to do now is to add a child, which is actually a column. And the column also has a very important property, which is called children. Now, children needs to be a list of widgets. So it's not just one child, but it is multiple children. Now, how would we go about adding some boxes to this column? Well, we have learned that we can use a container to specify a rectangular area and that it has a color property. So the first thing that we could try to do is to add a container like this, and maybe we could set this color to colors.orange. Now, if we try to hot reload now, we can see that nothing happens. And the reason for that is that our container does not have a child, and so when we put it inside a column, its size is actually 0. And that means that the container itself is not visible. So somehow we want a way to add boxes to our column, but we need to give them a size. And there are multiple ways of adding widgets that have a size in Flutter. So for this case, we want to use a new widget as the child of our container. And the widget that we want to use is called a sized box. Now, sized box is a widget that has 2 optional properties called width and height. So let's try to add them and see what happens. So I'm going to add a width of 100 and also a height of 100 also. So if I hot reload at this point, I can see that something strange happens. So part of the screen has gone back to white, some of it has stayed yellow, and I have this square box of color orange at the top. So I need to explain a little bit more about what's going on over here, and I'm going to do this in the next video. In the last video, we started adding some content to the body of our scaffold. And the way we've done that is by adding a container with a yellow color, and then we added a child column, and because this takes a list of widgets, then we try to add a container with a child size box inside it. And then we have given it a width and a height of 100 points and the orange color for the container. However, after making the change, we have observed that the result on screen was not quite what we had expected. So the key for understanding what is happening here is to see how a column actually works. And to illustrate this better, let me open up a diagram. Okay, so what we have here is a simple layout which is made by a yellow background. So this is similar to our container. And then there are three boxes which are laid out vertically. We have learned that to arrange items vertically, we need to use a column. However, to understand why things look differently on our screen, we need to learn about two important properties of column, which are called MainAxisAlignment and CrossAxisAlignment. MainAxisAlignment refers to how the children should be placed along the main axis of the column. So in this case, it is the vertical axis. Cross-axis alignment refers to how the children should be placed along the cross-axis of the column. So in this case, it is the horizontal axis. Each of these properties can be configured with a number of different values. So if we go back to our code, we can try to add a cross-axis alignment value to our column, and we can try to choose a value for it. Now, there are a number of different values that you can choose, and the editor is proposing them for us. And the one that is actually set by default is called CrossAxisAlignment.start. So if we reload here, we can see that nothing changes on this layout. Okay, so what we want to do here is to set the value of cross-axis alignment to stretch. And if we do that and save, we can see that suddenly we get the result that we were expecting. And that is that the box stretches all the width of the screen. Okay, so now that we have clarified that, let's take a look again at this sized box widget that we have added over here. So by specifying a width and a height, what we are actually doing is to tell Flutter that the desired dimensions of our size box are 100 and 100. But because this is inside a column with a cross-axis alignment of stretch, then the width parameter no longer applies, and instead the size of the box is going to fit the entire width of the column. Now this is exactly what we want, because we shouldn't need to specify a width for a widget that should match the width of its parent. In other words, we can drop the width of this box and leave the height only, and we can save and see that this works. Now you might wonder what would have happened if we had tried to set the cross-axis alignment value to something else, for example center or maybe end. And what would happen here is not what you might expect, and I don't want to make things confusing at this stage. So for now, I'll put this back, and please just bear with me, because in the coming videos we'll get a better understanding about column and flexible layouts in general. So for now, let's just carry on. The next thing that we can try to do is to add a new sized box, which represents the second vertical item in our layout. So we're going to continue on the next video. Okay, so in a moment we will continue from where we left and add a new box to our layout. But before I do that, I want to draw your attention to one little thing, and that is the way this code is formatted. Now normally, when you pass parameters to functions, these are always separated by commas. So for example here, I have an AppBar, and I pass in the title and the elevation parameters, and I have a comma at the end of each parameter. Now what you would do in other languages is to not have this comma on the last parameter. However, one very important thing to know is that the way in which you use commas in Dart is going to affect how your code is formatted. So what do I mean by that? As you can see on this file, the way we build our widgets in Flutter is by composition. So for example, here we have a container, and inside it there is a column, and then inside we have another container, and finally a sized box. This is still a relatively simple layout. However, if you look at the way this code is formatted, it looks a little bit like a pyramid of sorts, like this. And this is something that helps us keep track of the widget hierarchy that we're building. In addition to that, our code editor is adding for us some annotations at the end of each closing bracket. So for each closing bracket over here, we can see to which widget it refers to. So where am I going with all of this? Now this is a good time to introduce a command called dartfmt. And you can choose this command by opening up the code menu over here and going all the way down here to reformat code with dartfmt. Now be aware that there is also another line here called reformat code, so make sure you choose the correct one, which is called reformat code with dartfmt. And by the way, on my system I've added a custom shortcut to access this quickly, so that here I can just press Alt-Command-L and I can format my code. So after doing this, you can see that the code has been reformatted, and the way dartfmt does this is based upon where you put the commands in your code. So what I'm going to suggest going forward is that we always add commands at the end of parameter lists. So what this means for this code specifically is that here, for example, I had forgotten to put the comma at the end of my column. And so after formatting, the two closing brackets for column and container are folded together. So what I'm going to do is to add a comma here and then run dartfmt again. And you can see that the indentation has now changed. So just to give you another preview of how using commas affects your indentation, here I could remove this comma at the end of the AppBar, and if I format again, I can now see that the whole AppBar has been indented and put just on one line. So for the remainder of this course, you see me use commas very often, and the reason for that is that Flutter widgets often take a lot of different parameters. So I think separating them line by line keeps the code much more readable. Okay, so now that we clarified that, I can add the missing comma over here, and I'm also going to add this one over here so that we have them all. Alright, so before we move on, I just want to mention that if you want to customize your keyboard shortcuts in Android Studio, you can just go here on the menu, select Preferences, and here you find a key map item, and on the right, all the menus that are on the menu bar up here, you can just see them, open them up, and then you can select your own key maps for each one of the items that you want to change. Alright, so we can close this. And if you are using Android Studio, by all means, you can spend some time customizing your shortcuts. Okay, so we have managed to add our first box to our column layout, and we are ready to add the second one. Alright, so to create a new box, I'm going to select this section, and I'm going to copy and paste it into a new box, like this. I'm also going to change the color of the container to red. And if I hot reload, I can see that now the second box has appeared as well. Alright, so maybe let's take this step one step further and maybe create a third box, which maybe I can color with the color purple. And if I hot reload, here it is. So it looks like we have now managed to build a vertical layout, which was our original goal. So with the code that we have over here, we can add boxes, set their color, and also set their height. One thing that we can see over here is that the body of our scaffold is getting bigger and bigger, and really I think it would be a good idea here to extract all of this code into a separate method. So what we are going to do now is to move all this code to a new method, and I'm going to show you how to do this with a couple of tricks. So the first one is going to be about code selection. So here, for example, I could just place my cursor on this sized box, and then I'm going to press Alt plus up arrow multiple times, and I can do this to extend the selection of the enclosing scope. So I can carry on and do this until I reach the body of my scaffold, which is over here. Then I'm going to use a new command which is called extract to method, and in my system I've mapped this to Alt-M. So when I press that, I get a little dialog which asks me to choose a method name. So I'm going to call this build content. And when I press enter, what happens is that all the code that I had selected has now been placed into a new method called build content, and this method is now called from within the body of my scaffold. As you can see, the build method of our SignInPage is now much more readable, and it's easier to see that it just creates a scaffold with an AppBar, and then the body is now specified with this new build content method over here. We can see that Android Studio has defined this method with a return type of container. And this is because a container is the root widget of this entire block of code. In the future, I might decide that rather than returning a container, I might return some other kind of widget. And for this reason, I'm just going to change the return type to be a widget. Like this. Now, this is safe to do for two reasons. One is that a container is actually a subclass of widget, so I can change the return type to be a widget. And the other one is that the body of my scaffold actually requires a widget, nothing more specific than that. So very often when I extract arbitrary widget hierarchies, such as this one, I will take care of setting the return value of the extracted method to widget. Okay, so we now have this new method for building the content of our page. However, there is one small change that I still want to add to this method, and I'll do that in the next video. In the last video, we have extracted some of our widget building code into a separate method called build content. Now, before we move forward, I want to do another small change to the name of this method. So what I'm going to do is to select the method, and then I'm going to rename it. So I can do that by pressing Shift F6. And the way I'm going to rename this is to add an underscore at the beginning, like this. So why did I do this? The reason is that underscore has a special meaning in Dart. So here it goes. Underscore means private. So whenever we declare anything in Dart and we put an underscore at the beginning, that symbol becomes private. And what do I mean by private? So in Dart, private symbols are symbols that are only accessible inside the file that they are declared in. And so to show you what I mean, here I could go back to the main file and I could maybe create a new instance of the SignInPage, such as this. So I could type in SignInPage equals SignInPage, just like this. And then I could try to type in SignInPage dot, well, I could try to call build content, which is the way the method is called, but the editor doesn't even give me access to that in the first place. So it says that build content isn't defined for the class SignInPage. And the reason is that I made that method private. So if I went back here and I changed this once again to be public by removing the underscore, I could go to the main method over here, and now we can see that the code would compile and the editor is happy with it. Alright, so let me clear this up. Then I can go back to the SignInPage and make this method private once again. Alright, so now we understand how private works. But why is it a good idea to use private methods? Well, one good reason for this is that by defining methods, variables, and classes as private, we are declaring an intent that they are not to be used outside the file that they are declared in. And this is good to know, because when another developer looks at your code, they will know which things are meant to be public and which things are meant to be private. And also, declaring methods as private has the advantage that they are not accessible by autocomplete outside the file that they are declared in. Overall, as your codebase increases in size, it is very beneficial to publicly expose only the variables, methods, and classes that are meant to be public. Another way of saying this is that the fact that we have this method called buildContent over here is just an implementation detail of the SignInPage. So while the build method has access to it, the method is not accessible from outside. Alright, so in summary, we have learned to use underscore to declare things as private, and we have seen that it is good practice to use private whenever possible. Okay, so we're now ready to continue building our app, and we'll carry on the next video. In the previous videos, we have seen how to create a vertical layout by using a column as well as a combination of containers and size boxes. Just as a reminder about what our goal is for this page, let me open up the completed time tracker app. And here what we have is a title with a number of buttons. One thing that you can notice is that the buttons don't extend all the way to the edges of the screen. And also there is some distance between the buttons themselves. So the next thing that we're going to do is to get back to our layout and learn how we can add some padding to our widget. So to start off, we're going to look again at this container widget over here, and we're going to use a new property which is called padding. Now this padding takes an edge inset geometry object. Now this is not something that we have seen before, so for now I'm just going to type in some code and then I will explain how it works. So what we are going to do is to add a padding of 16 points to each side of this container. So to do that, I can type in edge insets.all and then pass in the value 16. Okay, so once I hot reload, I can see that now the 3 boxes are inset by 16 points in all directions. One thing that I want to show you is the documentation for edge insets. So if I tap through and I scroll up all the way above the class declaration, in here I can read that edge insets is an immutable set of offsets in each of the 4 cardinal directions. So in essence, this means that with edge insets, you can control the amount of padding on each of the 4 dimensions, and namely this is left, right, top, and bottom. So the method that we have used a second ago was called edgeInsets.all, and we can see clearly that all it does is to set all these different properties to the same value. So throughout this course, we will use padding a lot more, and so as we go along, we will see other ways of using edge insets. Now, before we move on, let me point out one more thing. Here we have used a container as the parent of our column, and we are slowly starting to learn that container is a very useful widget that is going to help us a lot with our layouts. However, in this example, if we don't care about the background color of this content window, but we are only interested in the padding that we have just set, we can actually replace our container with a new widget which is called padding. Now, padding doesn't have a color, so we had to remove this, but instead it takes just one property, and that is called padding, and it behaves exactly in the same way as the padding that we had in our container. So if we hot reload the code now, we can see that the background now goes back to white, but the padding remains the same. Now padding also takes a child, and that is why our code continues to work with the column now becoming the child of the padding widget. Okay, so we have seen how to use the padding widget to add padding around our content. The next thing that we want to see is how we can add padding between our boxes. So this is something that is actually very simple, because all we have to do is to add a sized box between our container widgets over here. So let's try that. So here I'm just going to add a sized box, and I'm going to give it a height of 8 points. And if I save, I can see that now there is a small padding between the orange and the red widget. So just to complete this, I'm also going to add a sized box here as well, with the same height. And if I save, here it is. Okay, so what I've just done here is a little trick that you'll see me doing again in this course. And that is, whenever I have widgets that are arranged vertically and I want to add a fixed size padding between them, I can do that by simply inserting a size box and using the height property as the spacing between the widgets. Alright, so we're making great progress with this layout, and we're going to continue on the next video. In the previous video, we have learned how to use paddings in Flutter. Okay, so we will soon be able to add more interesting widgets to our layout, but before I do that, there is one little tweak that I want to do. Now, if we head back to our completed app over here, we can see that these widgets are not positioned to the top of our content area, but instead they are centered vertically. So let's take a look at how we can do that. So back to our app, we can see that our boxes are arranged to the top of our content area. Now, if you remember, when we started talking about columns, we have seen how the CrossAxisAlignment property works. But there is also another property called MainAxisAlignment. And this is what we need to use in this case. So if we head back to our column over here, we can type in MainAxisAlignment and give it a value of MainAxisAlignment.center. If we reload, we can see that our three boxes move down to the center of our content area, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so I think we are ready to move on, and in the next video, we'll add some new interesting widgets. Okay, so I think that these nice colorful boxes over here have kept us good company over the last few videos, but regrettably it is now time to say goodbye to them. So we are going to slowly replace them with some more interesting widgets. And so to start off, we're going to add a new widget called text. As the name implies, text can be used to add text labels to the app. And so what we want to do is remove the first orange box and add a new text that says sign in. So let's delete this container and add a new text instead. Now the text that we want to show will say sign in. And if we save and reload, we can see that, yeah, the text appears. It is slightly small and it is on the left over here. So what we want to change now is the horizontal positioning on the text as well as its size. So let's take care of that. So for the alignment, there is a property which is called TextAlign, and that is text align, and we can set it to center. If we reload, we can see that now the text is centered in the middle, which is what we want. Now, in order to change the size of the text, we need to use a property which is called style. So if I type that in, it takes an object which is of type TextStyle. And TextStyle is something that has a number of different properties. So for now, we are interested in the font size, and we can set this to something big, for example, 32, like this. And if we save, we can see that the text is definitely become bigger. And I would also like the font weight to be a little bit bolder. So to do that, I can use a property which is called FontWeight, and I can set it to FontWeight dot bold, for example. And as we can see, the thickness of the text has now increased. I find that this may be still a little bit too thick for my taste, so I'm going to tap through FontWeight and just look at the documentation. And it says that it's the thickness of the glyphs using to draw the text, and it also shows me a set of values that go from 100 all the way to 900, and these are what we can use to have more fine-grained control over how thick we want the text to be. So bold is actually defined to be weight 700, and maybe in my case I want something more like semi-bold, so that is weight 600. So I'm going to choose this, and if I go back to my page, I'm going to pass that in, and when I save, I can see that the thickness has slightly reduced. Okay, so this looks good. One thing that I want to say is that TextStyle has a number of interesting properties that you can use to tweak the way text widgets look in your app. So if you want, you can pause the video and spend some time learning more about TextStyle and all its properties. Alright, so I'm happy with this text and we can continue on the next video. In the previous video, we have added some text to our sign-in page. And now we are ready to make things more interesting. So in a minute, we are going to add a button to our page. But before I type in any code, maybe I can just clarify what is a button. And there are three main things that you need to know. A button is a widget. The user can interact with the button by tapping on it. And when the button is pressed, we can be notified with a callback. Now, a callback is simply a method that is called for us, and we can use it to perform some action. So to give you some context, let me just open the complete app, which is over here. So as we can see, there are a number of buttons, and what happens, for example, when I tap on the Sign In with Google button is that I get this pop-up, and here I could continue with the signing process. So the way this flow works is that this button is part of the widget tree for the sign-in page, and when it is pressed, I use a callback to execute some code that performs authentication with Google Sign-In. Now that I explained this, let me clarify what the next steps are. So for the remainder of this chapter, we will see how we can add buttons to this page, and we'll spend some time customizing them so that they look exactly as you see over here. So our next goal is to get familiar with buttons in Flutter and complete the UI for our sign-in page. After we're done with all of this, we'll take a look at how to use the buttons callbacks to hook up the authentication functionality for our app. So let's add the first button in our next video. We are now ready to add a button to our sign-in page, and as a first step, we can remove these two boxes that have kept us company in the last few videos. So I'm going to my code, and down here I'm going to remove these two container boxes and reload. So now we're left with just the sign-in text. Now the button that we are going to add is called RaisedButton. So let's try to add it and hot reload. So I'm going to add a RaisedButton and just see what happens. So as we can see, there is a gray rectangle that appears on the screen. Now that is progress, but it's not very interesting. So let's add some properties to our button. The first thing that we're going to do is to add a text widget as the child of our button. So if I type in child, I can specify a text, and as the text I'm going to say sign in with Google. So if I add this and reload, well, I can see that there is some text in here, but as it stands, we have a dark gray text on a light gray background, and it's not very readable. So for now, what I want to focus on is the background color. And the color that you see over here is the color that is used when the button is disabled. So what we have done here so far is to add a button, but this is disabled. And what I mean by disabled is that when the user taps on it, nothing happens. Now the reason that this button is disabled is that we have not specified a callback for when the button is pressed. So at this stage, I should really take some time to explain how buttons and callbacks work. So here is what we're going to do next. I'm going to type in some code, and then we're going to observe how the button changes in our simulator. Don't worry if you don't understand this right away, I'll break it down step by step, but for now, please just bear with me and I will explain later. So here I'm going to provide an onPressed callback, and I do this by typing in open and close bracket and then open and close curly bracket. If I hot reload now, I can see that the button has changed color, and also you can tap on it and you get this nice splash effect, which is a visual hint from Material Design that tells me that this is a button that I can interact with. So while I'm here, I want to show you that by adding this onPressed callback, I can actually detect that the button has been pressed. So to do that, I can add a print statement, and here I could say button pressed, like this. So I can then open up the console, and what happens if I hot reload and try again is that every time I tap the button, I get some calls down here. Okay, so we have just managed to implement a callback for our button. However, it is the first time that we encounter this syntax over here, and I haven't really explained properly how this all works. So I'm going to do that in the next video. In the last video, we have added a raised button to our sign-in page, and we have seen that the button becomes enabled when we add the onPressed callback. At this point, it is a good time to explain how callbacks work and how they affect the way buttons behave in Flutter. So first of all, let's stop through the onPressed callback and let's see what the documentation says. So over here we can read call when the button is tapped or otherwise activated, and if this is set to null, then the button will be disabled. So if you remember, in the previous video, the button was disabled until we added the onPressed callback to our code. So one thing that we need to understand with buttons is that the onPressed callback is actually an optional property. And what that means is that if we want, we can omit the property altogether. And also, this is exactly the same thing as adding the onPressed property by giving it a value of null. So what I mean is that here we could just replace this and put null instead, which is completely valid syntax. And if we hot reload, we can see that the button is disabled again. So two things we need to remember here. One is that the onPressed callback is optional, and the second is that setting it to null is the same thing as not having it at all. Now the reason for that is that onPressed is a named parameter of RaisedButton, and named parameters in Dart are always optional and their default value is null. So we should now understand why leaving out the onPressed callback or setting it to null is the same thing, and why this causes the button to be disabled. If you remember, we have also seen that when we provide a value to our callback, then the button becomes enabled. So the way I've done this before is with a syntax which has two pairs of brackets. So round brackets and curly brackets like this. So how does this work? Well, once again, we can look at the documentation and we can see that the type of the onPressed property is void callback. So let's step through this as well and see what we get. And here we can read that void callback is a type definition, also called a type def, and it is defined as a function that takes no parameters and returns no data, which is normally written with type void. So in order to supply the onPressed callback to our RaisedButton, we had to give it a method that takes no parameter and returns no data. Now, one way that we could do that, for example, down here, could be to type in a new method called void sign in with Google, right? And give it no parameters, and I could actually pass this to the onPressed callback of my button over here, and the compiler will be happy with this. In practice, this is often what we want to do, and in fact, later on we will add the code for authenticating with Google here, like this. However, for now we only wanted to quickly provide a callback so that we can enable our button. So the quickest way to do this is just to implement the callback in one line. And maybe now this syntax makes a little bit more sense, because the first pair of brackets over here defines the parameter list, and in our case this should be an empty list, and the curly braces here define the implementation, which is just an empty implementation. Okay, so for now we're just going to leave this callback like this, and we can remove this method because we don't need it yet. And we are now ready to continue on the next video. We are now ready to get back to our sign-in page. What we want to do next is to style our button by customizing its background color and the text. This is quite simple to do, and it will give us the opportunity to talk about colors a little bit more in detail. So let's get back to our code, and we can change the background color of the RaisedButton by simply changing its color property. So we're going to type in colors and then colors.white, just like this. And if we hot reload, we can see that the button's color has changed. As far as changing the text that we see inside the button, we can see that we are using a text widget as the child of the RaisedButton. So rather than having a number of properties that we can set in our raised button to configure text, all we do here is to say that the button has a child, and that is a text widget. Now, this is a great example of composition, because if we wanted, it would be easy to replace this text with an image, for example. Okay, so let's get back on track. Because we are already familiar with the text widget, we already know how to modify its appearance. So to do that, we are going to make a little bit of space like this. And then in here we can add a style, and this is going to be a text style. And we could set here the color, for example, to be colors.black. And maybe a font size, and we could choose a value of 15 here. Just reformatting. And we can see that our button now has a white background color and a black text. Okay, so I'd like to spend a bit more time talking about colors. As you can see here, I've set the color to black, but I think black is a little too strong for my text, and I'd like to make it a little bit more light. So if I delete this and start typing in black again, then I can see that the editor is showing a few variants over here. So let me choose black 87, and then I'm going to tap through to reveal the documentation for this. So here it will say black with 87% opacity, and this is good contrasting color for text in light themes. Okay, so this sounds good because our background color here is white. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is that Flutter defines a number of custom colors that you can choose depending on the situation. So especially when it comes to displaying text, these different variants of black should work well in most common scenarios. So I encourage you to spend some time reading the documentation for the various black colors. Alright, so the next thing that I want to point out is that I would like to have a little bit more contrast between the background on my page here and the color on my button. So let's address that in the next video. We concluded our previous video saying that we want more contrast between the background color of our page and the color of our sign-in button. So to do that, we're going to use a property of our scaffold, which is called background color. So we're going to add it over here. I'm going to say background color. And here, I'd like to choose a light gray color. So the first thing that I could try is to type in colors.gray. Now, if I hot reload, I can see that the resulting value is quite dark, and really I'd just like it to be a little bit more light. So let's tap through the documentation for gray and see what we get. And it looks like gray is defined as a constant variable of type MaterialColor. So what is a MaterialColor exactly? So if I tap through to reveal the documentation and scroll up a little bit more, here I can see that MaterialColor is a class that extends color swatch of type int. So a color swatch is something that we can use to define a variety of shades. So every time we choose a material color as a color to be used in our UI, we can actually choose between multiple shades of that color. And that is because a material color is a color swatch. So let me just go back to my code and show you what this means in practice. So over here, I have prepared this code which defines a lot of different swatches. So what I'm going to do is to copy paste all this code inside the build method of my SignInPage, just like this. And what I can see as a result is that Android Studio draws some little squares next to each shade for the colors that I have chosen. So this is like a preview of all the color shades. Now this is quite useful, and you might remember that we wanted to choose a light gray color for our page. So all I have to do is to go down here where I've selected colors.gray and add some square brackets, and then I'm going to choose the correct shade for what I want. So if I try 200 and hot reload, I can see that now I have a much lighter gray color over here. Okay, so we should now understand a little bit better how MaterialColor works, and I'm going to leave you with a little tip. So every time you choose a material color, but you want a shade of that color, which is lighter or darker than the primary color itself, remember that you can easily preview and choose the shade that you want by adding square brackets to your color and choose the desired shade, like I've done here. Alright, so let me clean up this code, which we don't need, and we can continue on the next video. In the last videos, we started getting familiar with the RaisedButton class, and we have seen how we can set a child text widget and also the color over here. Soon enough, we will add more buttons to this page to represent the various sign-in options that will be available on this app. But before we do that, I want to discuss one additional property that we can configure to modify the look of our button. And that property is called shape. Now, what we want to do is to make our button's shape look like a rounded rectangle. So in Flutter, this is something that is relatively easy to do. So I'm going to go ahead and type some code, and then I'll explain it. So here I'm going to add a shape property, and I'm going to pass it a rounded rectangle border. Now to this object, I'm going to pass a border radius, and here I can specify a border radius dot all, and the value that I'm going to give it is radius dot circular, and then a value of 16.0, for example. Okay, so with this change, I can hot reload, and I can see that the border of this button has changed according to the radius that I've specified. So this is maybe a little bit more code than we were hoping for, and the reason for that is that there are multiple shape objects that we could choose from, and for this shape, if we want, we can customize each corner of the rectangle to have a different radius. In practice, this is not something that you will need very often, but I just wanted to spend a little time to talk about shapes so that you know that they exist and how to use them. By all means, you're free to look up the documentation for all these classes. For now, I'm just going to change the border radius to something smaller, like 4 points, and we're going to continue on the next video. In the previous video, we have added a shape parameter to our raised button, and we are almost ready to add some additional buttons to this page so that we can show all the different sign-in options for the user. One thing that we could do at this stage would be to copy-paste all this code and change the text and the colors so that we can show the Facebook sign-in button. However, we can already see that we have about 15 lines of code to copy-paste, and then we would have to do this more than once for the remaining buttons. Instead, I propose that we create a custom raised button widget that we can reuse for this and other pages in our application. So this is going to be a good exercise about creating our own custom widgets. Because the intention of this is to create a widget that we will reuse outside the sign-in page, we are going to create a new folder for this. So over here in my project panel, I can create a new folder, and here I'm going to name it common widgets. And then inside this folder, I'm going to create a new Dart file, and I'm going to name it custom raised button, like this. Alright, so we are going to add the code for our custom raised button in the next video. We are now ready to start implementing our custom raised button. So this is going to be a stateless widget. So to get this up and running quickly, I can type in stateless, and then I just need to fill in the class name, which is custom raised button. Okay, I also need to import material from the packages, so I can just do that quickly, and my code should now compile. Now inside the build method, I need to add the code for building the button itself. So what I'm going to do now is to go back to the sign in page over here, and then I'm going to take all this code which I had before, and I'm gonna copy it inside the build method of my custom raised button. And just to make sure that this works, I need to return the raised button so that the build method is happy and I have a widget as a return value. Now at this stage, if I want, I can already use this custom raised button inside my sign in page. And to show you that this actually works, I'm just going back to the sign in page and I'm going to add it below the raised button that we already have. So I'm just adding a sized box of height 8 so that we can have a little bit of space. And then I can add in a custom raised button like this. Of course, this is now saved into a different file, so I need to remember to import it. So I can do that like this automatically. Now at this stage, I can hot reload and I can see that I have two identical buttons. The first one is the one that we had created before, and the new one is this custom raised button that we have just created. Now, one thing to point out is that this custom raised button is actually not custom at all, because all the values are hard-coded inside the build method. So what we want to do instead is to supply some configurable properties to this custom widget so that it really becomes reusable. So what we are going to do now is to declare all the properties that we want to reuse. We are going to add a constructor so that we can ensure that these properties can be set when the widget is created. And then we need to remember to actually use these properties on the build method. So let's start with step 1. So over here, we're going to create a few properties and we're going to make sure that they are all final. And this is important because all the properties inside the stateless widget need to be immutable. So final guarantees that the properties are immutable and we can't change them once they are created. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to type in final widget child. Then the next one is final color. Then we have final double, and then border radius. And finally, we're gonna have final void callback on pressed. Now we need to also remember that these properties need to be passed in with the constructor. So we're going to create one, use the open and close brackets, and inside it open and close curly brackets so that all the parameters are going to be name parameters. And here we can declare them as this.child, this.color, this.borderRadius, and this.onPressed. If I add a comma, I can format the code. Okay, so now that we have defined all these properties, we need to use them. So in the build method, we are going to replace this text widget with the child, then this color with the color, and then we can apply the border radius over here, like this. And finally, the onPressed callback can also be updated like this. Now, because we have added this constructor over here, we need to remember to pass in all these values to custom raised button from the sign-in page. So let's do that. Okay, so in our custom raised button over here, we need to pass in the properties. So we're going to start off with the child, and really what we want to do is to use this same text configured in the same way that we had it before. So here I'm just going to copy paste it. Then we know that we need to pass a color, and this is going to be colors, the white. We know that now we need to pass a border radius, and this is going to be 4.0. And finally the onPressed callback, and we're going to define it in the same way that we've done before, like this. So now I can actually save and reload, and I can see that this all still works. But because now this is a reusable button, I could very easily change some of these parameters, for example by saying sign in with Facebook. And then if I reload, then I can see that this gets updated. Okay, so now that our custom raise button is created, we can actually delete the old one, and we're going to use just this one going forward like this. So I'm going to delete that and also restore the text to sign in with Google. At this stage, you might point out to me that even though we have created a custom raise button, it still creates quite a few lines of code to just create a button. And all we have accomplished with this refactoring is to hide away the complexity for providing a custom shape. So all we do now is just supply a border radius. As we will see in the coming videos, we will create additional custom button widgets that are based on this custom raise button, and perhaps the advantages of doing this refactor early on will become more obvious as we make progress. In any case, we have now learned how to create our own custom widgets, and we will see that this is something that will pay off. So let's continue on the next video. Okay, so now that we have created our own custom raised button class, I want to show you a new way of creating custom widgets. So what we're going to do next is to create a new widget called SignInButton, and rather than creating this as a stateless widget, we are going to subclass directly from custom raised button. The goal with this is to make it easier to create a button with a text inside. So because the button class that we are about to create will only be used in the sign-in section of the app, we are going to create a file for it inside the same folder as the sign-in page over here. So we're going to create a new Dart file and we'll call it SignInButton. So here is what we are going to do. We're going to create a new class called SignInButton, and this class is going to extend custom raised button like this. I'm going to quickly import the file. Then this class is not going to define a build method. Instead, we will just create a constructor and pass in a number of properties. And then we will hand over these properties to the constructor of the superclass, which is custom raised button. So let's go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you the advantage of this approach. So here we're going to type in SignInButton, which is our constructor, and then inside we're going to type in some properties. The first one is going to be string text, then color, then color again, but this time text color, and then void callback on pressed. Then what we are going to do next is going to call the super class constructor. So the way we do that is to type in a column, then super, and then open bracket. And inside here, we can pass in some parameters. So one of them is the child. And here we're going to type in text with the text, and then style, which is a text style. And in here we can pass in the remaining parameters that we have created. So text color, and then for example a font size of 15. Now before I go ahead, I can see that some symbols are missing, so I'm just quickly going to import material from the Flutter package. So now Flutter is happy. And then I'm going to continue with my parameter list. So next I'm going to pass in the color, which is color, and then we're going to pass in the onPressed as onPressed parameter like this, and this is done. Now that I've typed in all the code, let me explain it. So what we have done here is to provide a constructor as a way to supply all the parameters that are needed to create the custom raised button. You can notice that I've not used the usual this.properties syntax that is common with constructors in Dart. The reason is that this class doesn't declare any properties at all. In fact, the way this works is by taking all these properties and invoking the constructor of the superclass, which happens here. Then, in the constructor arguments of the superclass, we pass some parameters directly, such as the color and the onPressed callback. But as you can see, we also create a text object on the fly, and we configure its text and style properties directly. So this is going to make it very easy to use our SignInButton class, and we're going to see how to do that in the next video. In the previous video, we have created a SignInButton, and now we are ready to use it. Okay, so here what we want to do is replace this custom RaisedButton with a SignInButton. And to do that, I'm just going to change the name. So SignInButton. The compiler doesn't find this, so I need to remember to import it. And now the compiler tells us that SignInButton doesn't have a child widget, and also it doesn't have a border radius property. So let's fix this. The first thing that we can do is to remove this child property, and instead what we want to do is to type in text, and here we can type sign in with Google. Also, we now specify a text color, and this is going to be colors.black87. And the border radius is something that we had actually defined for our custom RaisedButton, but we have not specified that this is a property of our SignInButton. So this is why the compiler complains. So what we're going to do here is to actually remove this property from here, and if we wanted, we could actually add it over here and maybe hard code it. Instead, what I'm going to suggest is that we open up the custom RaisedButton class and we add a default value for the border radius. So to do that, we add a column here, and then we specify a default value, for example, 2.0. Now, the reason we do this here is that if we ever create a custom RaisedButton and we forget to pass in the border radius, then a sensible value will be used. Okay, so I can save here. I can see that the radius actually has become a little bit smaller. It was 4 previously, now it's 2.0. And just to make things clear, if I want, I can still go to the SignInButton, and in here I can specify a border radius and give it a different value, for example 8 points. So at this stage, if I save, I can see that the new value of 8 points has been used. So let's revert back to 2, and let's get back to the SignInPage and continue. In the previous video, we have replaced the custom RaisedButton with the SignInButton that we had created earlier. As you can see, we can now declare a SignInButton, and it is quite easy to configure it with the properties that we need. And if I click through to reveal the SignInButton class, then we can see how we use it to configure our custom RaisedButton superclass. Now, there is one more thing that I'd like to configure in my custom RaisedButton class, and that is the height of the button itself. In particular, I'd like to set the height of all the buttons that we will create on this page to 50 points. So what we are going to do next is that we modify our custom RaisedButton class to add a height property. So let's see how we can do that. So on the build method over here, we create a RaisedButton. However, as you can see, this does not take a height parameter. So if I try to type in height, nothing comes up. So the way we are going to approach this is to wrap our RaisedButton inside a sized box. So let me show you how to do this. I can move my cursor to RaisedButton, and then I'm going to press Alt Enter, and out of the list of options here, I can choose Wrap with New Widget. This is a very useful command because my RaisedButton has now been made the child of a widget that I had to specify. So here I'm going to type in sized box like this, and now I can go and add a height parameter. So for now, let's add that like this and hardcode a value of 50 points. If I hot reload, then I can see that the changes take effect. So this is great progress. The next thing that I want to do is to make sure that this height is configurable. so that if other widgets on my code use a custom raised button, then they are able to specify a custom height. Well, we have already seen that to do that, we can add another property to our class and make it configurable via the constructor, just in the same way that we have done here for our border radius. So I'm going to add a new final double height like this. Then on the constructor, I'm going to call this the height, so that this is a parameter that can be passed in. And also I want to provide a default value. So in this case, it's going to be 50. This is so that if the code that calls this constructor doesn't specify a height, then a value of 50 will be chosen. And then of course, I need to remember to use this height and put it down here, like this. Okay, so now that the height can be configured on the custom raise button, I could go back to the sign in button, and here I could add it as a property, for example, with a value of 40. And if I hot reload, I could see that the button height updates. And if I really wanted to take this further, I could also make the height a configurable property of the SignInButton class itself, so that I could specify the height from my sign-in page. But as I said before, I want all sign-in buttons on this page to have the same height. So for now, I'm just happy to leave the default value that I set in custom raise button. So in summary, it is really up to us to choose what properties are configurable and whether we expose them to our calling code or not. Alright, so we have now completed the customization of our button classes, and we can continue on the next video. We are now ready to add a new button to sign in with Facebook. So let's head back to our sign-in page, and down here we're going to first add a new sized box with a height of 8 points, and this is as usual to add some spacing. And then we can try to add the new sign-in button. So just to do this quickly, I'm going to copy paste this code and just change its properties. So for the text, I'm going to have sign in with Facebook. Then the text color, I want to have colors.white. And then for the color, I'm going to type in a value which should be pretty close to the color of the Facebook logo. And so to do this, I'm going to use a constructor of the color class, which takes an int as a value. And this represents the color that we want in hex format. So I'm just going to type in a value like this, 0xFF334D92. And in case you're not familiar with the hex format, you can tap through here and read the documentation. Alright, so for now, let's get back to our sign-in page, and I just want to quickly point out that I've left the callback value empty in the same way that we have done before. So if we hot reload now, we can see that the Facebook button appears. Okay, so this looks good, and so let's carry on. And just to remind ourselves about how our completed page looks like, let's get back to our finished app. So I can go down here, and I can see that there are 2 more buttons with a text between them. Alright, so let's add those as well. I can get back to my main app, and here I can add a 3rd button. So to do that, I'm going to add both a size box and a sign-in button. So I'm going to copy paste that, and then for the text, I'm going to say sign in with email. I'm going to leave the text color as white. For the color, I'm going to choose colors.teal, which is a variant of green, and I'm going to choose a specific shade, which is going to be the value 700. And as usual, I will leave the callback empty. So if I save at this stage, you can see that signing with email also appears. Okay, so next I want to add a small text value to separate the first 3 buttons from the last one that I'll add in a second. So as usual, I'm going to add a sized box like this. And then here I'm going to type in a text widget. This is going to have a value called or, and then it's going to have a style. And here I can specify text style. with a font size, for example, of 14, and a color of colors.black87. Okay, so if I save now, I can see that the text appears, however, it's aligned to the left. Instead, I want to specify a text align of textAlign.center. And if I save now, it goes in the position that I want. Okay, so finally, we can add the last button to our list. And so once again, I'm going to copy and paste size box and a SignInButton. And in here, we can change the text value to say go anonymous, like this. We want to choose a text color, in this case of colors.black. And we're going to have a color of lime with a shade of 300, just like this. So if I save here, I can see that the final button appears as well. Okay, so the last thing I want to do on this video is to actually increase the spacing that I have between this title at the top and the remaining buttons. So this spacing is defined by this size box between the text and the first button, and I want to increase that to 48. So here we go. Okay, so we have made great progress in building our sign-in page, and there is just one more thing that we need to do before our layout is complete. So let's continue on the next video. In the last video, we have added all the buttons that we wanted to have in our sign-in page. And it's been a long way to get to this point, but we have learned a lot of things about building layouts in Flutter. So congratulations to you for making it this far. Alright, so before we conclude this chapter about layouts, there is one more thing that I want to add to this sign-in page. So if I head over to the completed app, we can see that the Google and Facebook buttons have a little logo to the side of the button text. So the final thing that we want to do in this chapter is to see how we can add this logo. And in order to do that, we are going to learn how to load an image from file in Flutter, and we will also introduce a new widget that will help us to position our logo in the correct place inside a button. Okay, so in order to proceed, we need some images that we will use for our logos. So I have prepared a zip file that contains all the images that we need. So as a next step, I invite you to download this file, and then we will resume in the next video, where I will show you how to import the images in the project. If you followed the instructions in the last video, you should have now downloaded a file called images.zip. So what we're going to do next is to extract this file, and I can just double click on it. And then we want to take this folder and copy it over to the root of our Flutter project. So to do that, I'm just quickly going to drag this folder all the way up to the root of the project, which is at the top, and then I can release. And Android Studio proposes to confirm the folder. So this is definitely the root of my project. So then I'm going to tap OK. And I can see that the images folder appears just below the Android folder. So make sure you put it in this place. Then the next thing that we need to do is to configure our project so that the images can be loaded into the app. So in order to do this, we are going to look at our project panel down here and open this file called pubspec.yaml. Now this is the main configuration file that is generated every time you create a new Flutter project. So for now, we are just going to use this to add new images to the project, but as we will see later, you can also use this file to add third-party dependencies, also known as Flutter plugins. Okay, so let's just stay on track. So what we want to do is scroll down a bit and find this section called Flutter. And we can see that over here there are a lot of comments, and this one specifically is about assets. So what it says is to add assets to our application, add an assets section like this. So this is what we are going to do. So down here, I'm going to press enter. I want to make sure that I'm one tab in to follow the correct indentation, and then I'm going to type in assets and then a column. Make sure you have a column, otherwise it won't work for your project. And then in here, we need to list the assets that we want to import to our project. So just to see what the file names are, if we open up the images folder over here, I can see that there is one called Facebook logo and one called Google logo.png. So this is what we want to use. We can get back over here, and then we can type enter with a new line and then space dash space, and then we're going to type in images / Google logo.png, and then we're going to do the same thing for the Facebook one. So I'm going to type in dash space images / Facebook logo.png. Now, just to be completely clear, in order for the files to be imported correctly, we must specify their position relative to the root of the project. So because our files are inside this images folder, we must type in images. And also, let's make sure to use the correct extension for the files as well, which in this case is PNG. Okay, so after I've done this, I can save the file. And if I look up over here, there are a few commands that are available. So the one I'm interested in is called packages get. And if you want, you can press this, but just to show you, you can also do this from the terminal. So if I open up a terminal, in here I can type in Flutter packages get, and this will update all the dependencies, including the assets that we have just added. Alright, so we have learned how to import images to our Flutter project, and very shortly we'll be able to show them inside our application. So let's continue on the next video. In the last video, we have seen how to import images in the pubspec.yaml file. Before we continue, I want to talk about image variants. So if we read over here, we can learn that an image asset can refer to one or more resolution-specific variants. And so we also have a link that we can follow to read more information about it. So let's open this up. And if you want, you can pause the video here and read this page to get a full understanding about image variants. For now, I'm just going to give you a summary. And that is that different devices have different device pixel ratios. And in essence, a pixel ratio defines the pixel density of the display. So to account for the different pixel densities of various devices, Flutter gives us a way to specify multiple variants for the images that we use. So if we head back to our project, you can open up the images folder over here, and you'll see that this has 2.0 and 3.0 variants for the images that we use. So if you open up the Google logo in 1x and 2x and 3x, we can see that these are different variants of the same image. So what this means is that you can run the app on devices with different pixel densities, and Flutter will automatically choose the variant that is most optimal for your specific device. But in order for this to work, you need to specify multiple image variants like I have done here, and the naming of these folders actually matters. So as I said, you can read more about image variants on the documentation, and for now, let's get back on track and continue on the next video. Okay, so now that we've imported the logos into our project, we can do a quick experiment to see if we can show them on the screen. So what we are going to do in this experiment is to add a new image to this page, and we're going to add it just after our last button over here. So here we can introduce a new asset called image, and image has a number of different constructors, and the one that we need to use to load an asset from file is called asset. Here we need to pass the name of the asset. In our case, we were going to use images / Google-logo.png. And if we hot reload now, we can see that this Google image appears on the page. Okay, so this is interesting, but ultimately what we want to do is to add the image inside our button to the side of the text over here. Okay, so I think that a first step towards that is to see if we can show this image inside the button. And one thing that I want to point out is that this image class is actually a widget. And if you remember, when we created the custom RaisedButton class, we specified that its child property is a widget. So the point that I'm trying to drive home here is that if we want, we can create a custom RaisedButton and pass an image as a child. And we can do this very quickly because all we have to do is to wrap our image asset into a new widget, and this is going to be a custom RaisedButton, like this. Next, we need to remember that our custom RaisedButton takes a color and a callback. So here we can type color, and then here we can have colors.white, and then the onPressed callback, and as usual we can use an empty callback like this. So if I save here and hot reload, I can see that a new button appears and the image is placed just inside the button. Okay, so one little tweak that I could do at this stage is to take this button and move it just above the Google Sign In button, which is up here, and maybe add a little bit of spacing as well. So as usual, sized box with a height of 8, so that I can reload and see how the page updates. Okay, so I think this is a good time to take a pause so that we can highlight what we have just done. So we started off by adding an image to our page, and then we wrapped this image inside a custom RaisedButton. And I think this really shows the power of composition. So perhaps now we understand a little bit better why I've chosen to implement the custom RaisedButton class the way I did. So you see, I have explicitly decided that the custom RaisedButton constructor should take a child widget. And the fact that this is a generic widget and not a text, for example, means that I can put any widget I want as its child. Okay, so if there is a point that I'd like to drive home here, is that building reusable and configurable widgets can be a big win in the long run. Okay, so this is great progress, and we're going to continue in the next video. In the last video, we have seen how we can add an image inside our button. Our next goal is to figure out how we can show an image and a text side by side. Earlier on, we have learned that in order to align multiple widgets vertically, we can use a column widget. So it might be tempting to see if there was a way to align widgets horizontally instead. And in Flutter, this is easily done with a widget called row. Now, one interesting thing that we can try is to wrap our image inside a row. So let's try that. And here, Android Studio gives us an option to wrap with row. So now, because row doesn't take one child, but it takes a list of children instead, then we end up with a list with our image as the only child. Now, what we could do next is to add a text widget as the second child. And here we could say sign in with Google. So here we could then hit save to hot reload, and now we have both our logo and the text inside the button. However, these widgets are not positioned in the way that we want. Ideally, we would like for the text to be centered and for the logo to appear on the left. Now, previously, we have discovered that columns have a MainAxisAlignment property that we can tweak to arrange widgets within the main axis. Similarly, we can specify a MainAxisAlignment property for our row. So for example, MainAxisAlignment.center, and this will affect how the widgets are positioned in the horizontal axis. Okay, so now we can see the effect of MainAxisAlignment.center, and clearly this is still not what we want. What we need to do here is to find a way to add some spacing between the logo and the text widget. And it turns out that there are 3 possible values of MainAxisAlignment that can be used to add spacing between widgets. So these are called MainAxisAlignment.space between, space around, and space evenly. So for now, let's try space between and see what we get. So it seems that now the logo has gone into the correct place. However, the text itself has been pushed all the way to the right. Okay, so I think this might be a good time to look up the documentation for main axis alignment and specifically space between, and see if that gives us a clue about what we can do to fix our layout. So if we tap through, we can see that space between is used to place the free space evenly between the children. Now this is useful, however, at the moment we only have 2 children inside our row, and as a result, all the available space is going to be in the middle between the logo and our text widget. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is to suggest a little trick that we can use to take advantage of the behavior of space between, so that we can get our text positioned right in the middle. Okay, so here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy this image asset and I'm going to paste it right after the text widget. If I save it, then I can see that what we end up with is our logo, then our text, and then the logo again, left to right. So by using space between, we can ensure that the spacing between widgets is the same. And because the first and the last widget are identical images, then they have the same width. So as a result, the text appears exactly in the middle. Okay, so with this little hack of adding another image asset to the right of our text, we have managed to get the text in the desired position. Somehow, if there was a way to hide the image to the right, but without actually removing it from the row itself, then the positioning would remain the same and our button would look as intended. So we are going to see how to do this in the next video. In the last video, we have learned about the row widget and explored various options for aligning widgets horizontally. We have also been able to center our text widget horizontally. Now the next thing that we want to do is to see how we can hide the image asset on the right without removing it from our row. Now this is a good opportunity to introduce a new widget called Opacity. So I'm going to add this widget first, and then I'm going to explain how it works. So here, like we have done before, we are going to wrap our widget with a new widget, and we're going to call this Opacity. I'm going to format my code. Now Opacity takes a child, which is our image asset, and also it takes an opacity decimal value between 0 and 1. And so here we're going to set this value to 1 and see what happens. And if we hot reload, we see that the image is still here. However, if we set this value to 0 and save, we can see that the image disappears. So how does this work? Let's tap through the documentation for the opacity widget. And if we scroll all the way up, we can discover that opacity is a widget that makes each child partially transparent. So the way this works is that if we set a value of 1, then the child widget is completely opaque and visible. Whereas if we set the value to 0, then the child widget is completely transparent. In other words, we can use the opacity to make widgets visible or invisible, but without removing them from the widget tree. And this is exactly what we want, because it means that we can take advantage of the MainAxisAlignment dot space between property of our row to center the text horizontally. Okay, so we have managed to get both the logo and the text in the desired position inside our custom raised button, and we've done that by using a row with a MainAxisAlignment value of space between and an opacity widget. Just to be clear, I admit that this is a bit of a hack, but considering that we are only using this to build a relatively simple layout, I think it works well in this case. So what we're going to do next is to refactor this code into a new widget class so that we will be able to reuse this for the Facebook button as well. In the last video, we have completed the layout for our Google Social Signing button. What we want to do next is to refactor this code into a new widget class that we will be able to reuse. this widget class will be configurable, and we will be able to specify an image asset name as well as the text that we want to show. So in the same folder as our sign-in page, we're going to create a new Dart file, and we'll call this SocialSignInButton. Then we need to decide how we are going to implement this. In the previous videos, we have seen a couple of different approaches for how we can implement custom widgets. Initially, we created this custom RaisedButton class, and the way we've done this was to subclass from stateless widget and then implement the build method with the logic that we needed. And this works by using the properties that are passed into the constructor. Later on, we created a SignInButton class, and in this instance, we went for a different approach. And that was to subclass directly from our custom RaisedButton class and pass in any constructor arguments directly into the constructor of the superclass. This has the advantage that we don't need to declare a build method at all, and so this approach requires less code. So I'm going to suggest that we use this approach once again, and the way we are going to do this is to copy-paste this whole file into our new SocialSignInButton file. As a first step, we are then going to rename this as SocialSignInButton and rename the constructor as well. So what we have now is a new widget class called SocialSignInButton, but its implementation is identical to that of SignInButton. What we want to do instead is to replace this text widget with the new code that we have added on the sign-in page to show a logo and the text inside the button. So in other words, we are going to copy this row widget and its entire content, and we're going to paste it in here to replace the text widget. Okay, this is good progress. However, we can see that the asset name and the text are hard-coded. Instead, we want these properties to be customizable. So what we're going to do now is to add a new property to the constructor called string_asset_name. And then we're going to use this property over here and also over here. And also we want to use the text property that is passed to our constructor inside this text widget. Finally, we have this text color that is passed to our constructor but is not used anywhere. So if you remember, the way that we use this is to add a style property to our text. And so here we're going to type in style, and then it's going to be a text style with a color of text color. And we also specify a font size of 15, which is the same value that we were using in our SignInButton. Okay, so this completes the implementation of our SocialSignInButton class. And what we want to do now is to use it. So if we head back to our SignInPage class, what we're going to do is to replace this SignInButton widget with our new SocialSignInButton. We must of course remember to import it, so let's do that. And we must remember that this new class requires a new parameter called asset name. So we're going to add it, and here we can type in images/google-logo.png. So at this stage we can save the file, and we can see that the second Google sign-in button now shows the logo that we want. Okay, so we now no longer need this custom RaisedButton class that we had originally used to prototype our SocialSignInButton. And you can see that the new class that we have created is much easier to use and requires much less code. And that's because we've hidden all the implementation details about the row layout. So let's delete this widget alongside the spacing and refresh. Okay, so it looks like I originally had a spacing of 48 points between the title and the first button, so let's restore that. And now we are ready to add the logo to the Facebook button as well. So down here, we are going to transform this widget into a social sign-in button as well. And we're going to type in the asset name, which is images/Facebook logo.png. And we can refresh again, and we can see that the Facebook logo now appears. Okay, with this last change, we have completed the entire layout for the sign-in page. So congratulations for making it this far. I feel that this has been a long introduction to building layouts in Flutter, but we have learned a hell of a lot in the process. Before we complete this chapter and move on to the next one, there is one more detail that I want to illustrate, and we're going to see that in the next video. In the previous videos, we have created 3 custom button widget classes that made it easier to write the layout of our sign-in page. In particular, this SocialSignInButton takes 2 properties called asset name and text, and these properties are required so that the widget knows how to draw itself. I want to quickly show you what happens if we forget to specify one of these properties. So I'm going to comment this out and save. And here I can see that the screen goes completely red with an error in yellow. Additionally, I could open up the console, and if I scroll up, I see a long stack trace, which shows an error as well. In general, this is something that happens when we forget to pass required properties to one of our widgets. And so if we look at the assertion over here, it is not entirely clear, but it says asset name not null is not true. And the reason we get this assertion is that the image.asset constructor that we pass over here really needs to have an asset name that is not null. So in general, this is an error that happens when we forget to pass required properties to one of our widgets. And because we have commented out this line and asset name is a named parameter, then this will take a null value if we don't specify one. So this is not a great situation because we get an error at runtime. It would be a lot nicer if the compiler could help us out here by letting us know that asset name really is a required property. This will be very useful, and fortunately in Dart there is a way to specify when named parameters such as asset name are required. So let me show you what I'm talking about. When we declare named parameters, such as this asset name over here, we can use a special annotation called @required. And this tells the compiler that they are actually required. So if I move back to the sign-in page, I can now see that if I hover to this social sign-in button, it tells me the parameter asset name is required. And this is flagged up as a warning, even on the right over here. So the required annotation is useful because it can inform the compiler about which parameters are needed. And this helps us as developers because if we ever forget to provide a parameter that is required, then we can get a warning. And this is very useful because it allows us to find any potential programming errors early. So let's restore the asset name and we can see that the warning goes away. And let's save and reload as well. Okay, so with this knowledge, I think it could be worth to review the custom classes that we have created and make sure that we add the required annotation where necessary. So if we start with the social sign-in button, we can take a look here. And should the text string have a required annotation? Well, the answer is yes, because if this is null over here, then the text widget will throw an error. So we're going to add required in here as well. And what about the other parameters? Well, the color and the text color are optional, and the onPressed callback is also optional. In fact, we have learned early on that we can pass a null callback intentionally to disable the button. So we can head over to our SignInButton class, and this one takes similar parameters, so the only one that is required is the text string. And finally, we can take a look at the custom RaisedButton class. So here, the first property is the child, and this is passed on to the RaisedButton widget over here. Now this is actually not required because we could have a RaisedButton without a child. Then we have color and onPressed, which as discussed are optional. And finally, we have the border radius and the height parameters. Now, because we have provided default values for these parameters, it doesn't make sense for them to be required, because when we don't specify these parameters, then the default values will be used. Okay, so we have reviewed all our widgets and added the required annotation where appropriate. Next, I'd like to give you some guidelines about when to use default parameters and when to use the required annotation, and I'm going to do this in the next video. In the last few videos, we have completed the design of our SignInPage, and in the process of doing this, we have created our own custom widgets. And the way we have done that was to first write some code in the SignInPage and then extract this into separate widget classes. The reason for this is so that we can have some reusable code, and making code reusable is often a good idea because it means that we don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over. And since building reusable widgets is useful, on this video I want to share a couple of guidelines that you can follow when you create your own widgets. In particular, I'm going to talk about 3 different things: default parameters, the required annotation, and assert statements. We have already seen default parameters and the required annotation. However, we have not yet talked about assertions, and this is a good time to introduce them as they are often used together with the required annotation. So let's take a look at the SignInPage that we have created. And we can see that all the SignInButtons that we have in here use a text property. As we have seen, if we forget to specify the text property, so for example like this, then we get a warning from the compiler telling us that the property is required. Now, this is because we have declared this text property with a required annotation. However, if we wanted, here we could simply pass in a text value of null, and the compiler no longer complains about this. And that's because all required does is to check if we have added the property or not. What it does not do is to check if that property is null or not. So if we hot reload, we get an error that comes from text.dart inside the Flutter SDK, and it tells us there has been a failed assertion with data not equal to null. And if we open up the console, we can see the stack trace for this. Now, if we wanted, we could tab through, and this would reveal a line inside the Flutter SDK, and this has an assert statement in it. So this is an assertion, which is a special statement that we can use at runtime to check whether a condition is true or not. And if that condition is not true, then we get an error like the one that you can see over here. So if you want, you can spend some time looking at the source code for various widgets in the Flutter SDK, and you will find that many of them have assertions. And these are used specifically to guard against programming errors at runtime. So what I'm going to suggest is that we should also use assertions in our code as a way to catch errors early. And let me show you what I mean by that. So if we go to the SocialSignInButton class that we have created, here we could move the super line one line down, and here we could type assert, for example, text not equal to null with a comma. And if I reload now, I can observe that the error points exactly at my own source code inside SocialSignInButton. And this is a good thing because it is often much easier to diagnose errors like this happening in your own code rather than in the Flutter SDK. So now that we have seen how asserts are used, maybe it's a good time to repeat again what is the difference between required and assert. Required specifies that a property must be included, and assert stops execution if a Boolean condition is false. So there are some cases where if you want to make your code robust, you might need to use both. And this is exactly what we want to do here. So just as we added an assertion to our text property, we can also add one for our asset name property. So here I'm going to add another line called assert, and then asset name not null. And this is needed because if we passed an asset name which is null, then Flutter wouldn't know what asset to load for our image. Okay, so we have added assertions to our SocialSignInButton class, and similarly, if we open this SignInButton class, we can also add an assert for our text property over here. So let's do that with assert text not null. And this is all we need in terms of checking assertions for our SignInButton and our SocialSignInButton. So if we go back to the sign-in page, we can now restore the text that we had in here, and we are good again. Okay, so before we move on, I think we should take a look at our custom RaisedButton class as well. If you remember, we have said that sometimes it's useful to provide default values for certain properties. In this case, we have default values for border radius and height. And what this means is that when we create a custom RaisedButton, we don't have to specify these values explicitly. And all of this can be very useful. So as you can see, here I could change the value to 60, for example, and the border radius to 8. And if I hot reload, then I can see that all the buttons on the sign-in page are updated. So default values provide sensible defaults for properties in our widgets. Okay, so let me just put this back and carry on. So what default values don't do though is they don't prevent us from using the properties incorrectly. And what do I mean by that? So let me show you an example. If I open up the SignInButton class again, we can see that we are calling the super constructor and passing in the child, the color, and the onPressed properties. However, if I wanted to be a little bit malicious, here I could add a border radius and give it a value of null. And nothing stops me from doing that because in Dart we can set any variable to null if we want to. So if I save now, I'm going to get an exception now, and this is going to have a fairly long stack trace. And if I take a look at it, I can see that all the lines in this stack trace refer to code in the Flutter SDK. So unless you're familiar with the Flutter SDK source code, it is really not clear what is going on. And diagnosing errors like this can be quite difficult. However, we have just learned that we can use assertions to add runtime checks to our code. So if we open up the custom RaisedButton class, we can go to the end of our constructor here and add a colon and then assert border radius not null. And if I save and hot reload now, I can see that the error has completely changed. And it is a lot clearer now because I can see exactly the code that has generated the error right in my source code rather than on the Flutter SDK. So the stack trace that I get now is much more useful, and all of this is because I've added an assertion in my code. So the point that I'm trying to drive home here is that assertions are very useful runtime checks that you can add to your code. And especially when you write reusable widgets, it can be quite valuable to have assertions so that any errors are caught early if the widgets are used incorrectly. So let me fix my code so that it works again. So here on the SignInButton, I'm just going to remove the border radius and reload, and we're all good. And we can do a quick summary. So we have seen how to use default parameters, the required annotation, and runtime assertions to make our code better. The last thing that I want to point out is that assertions only work in debug mode. They are completely removed by the compiler when you build and run your apps in release mode. And this is something that makes sense because really assertions are there to surface programming errors. So we should always be able to fix these types of errors before our code is ready for production. Okay, so this concludes this section about building layouts in Flutter. Of course, my complete Flutter and Firebase course covers many other topics that are essential if you want to build robust and maintainable apps that can run in production. Nearly 5,000 students have enrolled in this course and have rated it very highly. So if you are serious about learning Flutter and Firebase, you should consider enrolling as well. Once again, you can buy the course for a discounted price on my website at codewithandrea.com or using the link in the description below. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.